next session, I'd like to invite Alistair Smith, CEO of the NGCAA. Now, I know many of you in the room know Alistair well, but for those that don't know, the NGCAA, National Golf Clubs Advisory Association, is a non-profit organisation that provides legal advice and administrative support to their members' clubs. So Alistair's going to give us some hot topics and great insights in terms of member discipline, plus some more. And then in this session as well, in terms of governance, we've got our club development and community manager, Theo Baker, who I'm sure you all know very well. We'll be talking to Alan Davis from Glamorganshire Golf Club around their recent governance changes. So a really exciting topic, lots of information. So please, again, scribble down some notes, but you will get the slides following today's roadshow. So thank you. Thank you, Alistair.
Borada. Good morning, that means, just in case you don't know. So Alistair Smith, I'm CEO of the NGCAA. We've been around about 100 years. For those of you that don't know, I haven't been there since the start, believe it or not. I've looked after it for about the last 7 years or so. Before that, I was a solicitor in private practice, looking after mainly employment law and member disciplinary matters with a large member organisation. Within the NGCAA, as Zoe said, we provide legal advice to golf clubs. We cover pretty much every area of law that can crop up within a golf club. We traditionally probably had about 60-70% of the inquiries were on employment law, and then we had COVID, and then pretty much 100% of the advice was all about COVID and the bits and bobs that sort of flowed from that. After COVID, the employment law seems to have gone down a bit, and we're now dealing more and more with member discipline. Yeah, it seems to have really cropped up more than anything on the inquiries that we get on email and on the telephone. So I don't know why it is that we've had it increase. Some people thought it may have been as a result of people being new to golf, coming in, not understanding the rules. They joined during COVID, they're misbehaving, but it's in actual fact been a lot more of the more established members who've been misbehaving. Don't know whether it's because they have felt constrained by the rules of COVID and then suddenly decide to let loose once they get freed from it all. But we've certainly seen it been a lot more of the established people who've been misbehaving. Another big thing, certainly from the inquiries that we get, is that the misconduct seems to be quite frequently to do with social media and telephones, whether it's unwarranted pictures of body parts being sent to people, or whether it's WhatsApp groups where there's a WhatsApp group for a roll-up and people are putting, either criticising other people, or they're putting inappropriate jokes, messages, GIFs on there, whatever. That can sometimes give rise to member disciplinary issues as well. So we'll move on to sort of have a look at how it works. The way I'm going to structure this is that we'll sort of set it in its context to begin with on this first slide. Then I'll take you through what I like to see as a sort of ideal disciplinary process. Then once we've done that, I'll highlight some common problems that we see crop up within a disciplinary process as and when you have to deal with it. So the starting point is the constitution. Okay, so if you're a limited company, your main document's your articles. If you're unincorporated, it'll be a set of rules. Within those documents, they're a contract with the members, yeah? They promise to pay their subs, you promise to let them come on your golf course and hit a ball, use the clubhouse, all that sort of stuff. But you also have within that, you have a promise where they say that they'll behave themselves, yeah? So we say that you, when you come to the golf course, you'll do all the things that you're supposed to do, but we have that within there, we will have power to manage the club vested in the committee or the board, and then that governing organisation, a body, the board or the committee, they then have the power to regulate and discipline the members, which includes expulsion and suspension, yeah? So we would have, I would say, in an ideal constitution, in your main document, your articles, or if it's rules for an unincorporated association, you just have fairly brief detail within that main document that says that, you will not bring the club into disrepute, you will not act contrary to the best interests of the club, but if you do, then the club will take you through a disciplinary process, and then we cross-refer to a separate document, which will be the rules or the bylaws, which is subsidiary to the main document, and that's where you'd have the full disciplinary procedure laid out, which takes you through invitation to a meeting, you'll come before a group of people who'll have a hearing and all that sort of stuff, and we lay out more detail of the process. The reason we want that is that when it's the subsidiary document, when the procedure or the rule document or bylaw document is subsidiary to the main one, that can then be changed much more easily by the committee or the board, because they will have the power within the main document to make those rules, policies and procedures, and that's all good. If you wanted to change the main articles or the main rules document, you've got to go to a general meeting and get a vote on it, and everyone's got to come along, and it's a right pain in the bum. So what we do is we keep the disciplinary procedure separate to it, and then if there were to be, God forbid, a breach of that procedure, so if we forgot to follow a particular step, or if we didn't do a particular thing, that member then can't bring a claim for breach of contract, yeah, because it's not part of the main contract document. It's just a policy or a procedural document that we can say, well, the board can change that at any time, so we've changed it, tough bananas, yeah? So we keep that separate, okay? From our main document, as I say, we cross-refer to the disciplinary procedure. We may have other policies and procedures that we would want to cross-refer to. So you might have a social media policy to tell people not to send rude pictures on WhatsApp groups. You might have a buggy policy, you might have an equal opportunities policy, all these things for members, and they would then be cross-referred. And we may well want those as being, if you breach one of these policies, we'll say in the disciplinary procedure, then you could be in front of the committee to get a disciplinary hearing. So when we come to define misconduct, as I say, main document, the main constitution, we say it's conduct that brings the club into disrepute. Be fairly brief within that, or acting contrary to the best interests of the club as per the disciplinary procedure. Disciplinary procedure, we then define it in a little more detail. We'd probably repeat that. We would have a reference to any breach of the articles, rules, bylaws as a nice catch-all. We'd also have breach of any other policies and procedures, documents relating to the club. And then we'd probably have another nice little catch-all in there that says any other conduct which, in the opinion of the committee or the board or in the opinion of the club, brings the club into disrepute, and then you've got absolutely everything there. If you were to try and mirror what you have in an employment disciplinary procedure, where you have a nice long list of examples of misconduct or gross misconduct, very often people will fall in between the cracks of that and manage to do something naughty that's not in your specific list. And I know we can have, the caveat on there that says, the following is a non-exhaustive list of misconduct. It just gets all a bit messy. There is case law going back years and years ago with the Showman's Guild, where the court said that member organisations have a relative amount of leeway to determine what's misconduct within their organisations. So I would say keep it relatively vague, obviously refer to what we've spoken about just now, and then when somebody does something naughty, you can say, yeah, that brings the club into disrepute, and pull them in for it. Okay? So, natural justice, that's the last point there. It's really, really important, the principles of natural justice, when we're dealing with anything within the civil arena, whether we're talking about court cases for breach of contract, whether we're talking about employment tribunals, whether we're talking about internal employment disciplinary hearings and grievances, and here when we're talking about member disciplinaries. Okay, so this sort of overlays everything else that we've got, but these principles will feed into, and you'll see when I mention what they are in a minute, they'll feed into how you write your disciplinary procedures now. So it's all about fair treatment, okay? So the first thing is that somebody has a fair hearing when they're accused of misconduct, yeah? They need to have a fair hearing where they can come along and defend themselves and say, no, I didn't do it, or yes, I did do it, but he provoked me, or whatever arguments they have. So they must have a fair hearing. They must have somebody impartial hear that. Yeah, so they can't have the person that's accused them of the misconduct hearing it. We don't want any of that. We want to make sure that they have an impartial hearing. And the final thing is it should also be offered an appeal. Okay? When it comes to the first point, the general part of having a fair hearing, yeah, there's a lot of things feed into that. So how do you have a fair hearing? Well, one of the things is that you get advance notification of the allegations, because it wouldn't be fair if you walked into a hearing and then suddenly got handed a whole list of allegations that you're supposed to have done, and you wouldn't have a clue about them. So you need time to prepare. So it's fair to get advance notification of that. It's also fair, as part of that hearing process, to get advance disclosure of the evidence that sat there. So if the club, by way of a disciplinary panel, are going to sit there and make a judgment upon you, they will have a stack of statements and some other bits and bobs of evidence and documents. If they're going to make that decision, it's only fair that the person who's accused of it has the same stack of documents to look through and pick holes in it and try and defend themselves. Yeah. So advanced disclosure of allegations and evidence is very important. The other thing that's important as well is when you get up to the court level, there's a right to get legal representation. So you see, everybody brings a solicitor or a barrister when they're in court and they represent them in the case. That general principles within fairness is distilled down a little bit when you get to internal hearings. So when we're in the world of employees for disciplinary, the law gives them the right to be accompanied by a trade union rep or a work colleague. Yeah. When we're in the world of member discipline, we would say they should be accompanied by a fellow member. Yeah. We don't want to let them bring a barrister in, because solicitors and barristers are awful, and they will make the process overly complicated. Yeah. The whole idea of an internal disciplinary process is that you are judged by your peers, and it all stays internal, and it doesn't get mixed up in the red tape of the law and people arguing over tiny little annoying points on procedure. We have seen it in a few clubs where somebody's brought a barrister in and they've just absolutely gone for the panel, and the panel's not been particularly strong, and they've just absolutely, caved in and been frightened of the barrister. They've not, the accused person hasn't even addressed the issue of whether or not they did what they were accused of doing. The panel was so frightened of what this barrister was saying to them about them not following procedure and how dare they do all of this stuff, that they just backed down and the whole thing went away. So we don't want to get involved with that. We want it to be more of a layman's type of hearing, where it's member to member being judged by fellow members. Yeah, but we still do want to give them that right to be accompanied, so that they're not like a rabbit in the headlights. Sometimes that person that accompanies them will only take notes, and that's fine, because if you think about it, if you're trying to, if you ended up going to an appeal, or you're trying to present a decent case, if you're got one eye on trying to take notes, you can't really think and concentrate on what you're trying to do by way of presenting a case to put forward a decent defence. It's important with the person that accompanies them as well, though, to make sure that that person knows what their rights are or what they can do within that process. So they would be entitled to ask questions on behalf of the person that they're with. They'll be able to make representations, to say he's a good lad, he's never done this before, make those representations on his behalf, maybe do a closing speech for him to summarise the case and what have you. But what they can't do is answer questions on their behalf. Yeah, so that's down to the individual member to answer the questions that are asked of them. Okay, so we move on to what a nice, squeaky clean, shiny disciplinary process would look like. So the first thing is, for you guys as managers and secretaries, you need to take a step back and be aware of what the overall grand picture is for a disciplinary. There are 3 stages to it. There's the investigation, there's the disciplinary hearing, and the appeal. Not everything will go to an appeal, but those are the 3 main stepping stones. For each of those 3 stepping stones within a disciplinary process, we need to have a different person or different group of people hear each one. Yeah, because we want people to be impartial. So we can't have the investigator then go on to hear the disciplinary hearing, and vice versa. We don't want that panel to then go up and end up hearing the appeal. They will be an element of prejudgment if those people go ahead and hear subsequent parts of the process. So we want to make sure that we've got an eye on the prize, if you like, as to what we're seeking to do. So as soon as that first allegation comes in, as secretaries and managers, we need to be thinking 2 steps ahead of who's going to deal with the investigation, who's then going to deal with disciplinary and appeal before we set anything in motion. And obviously, if you get, I don't know, if you get a complaint letter come in, don't then, take 10 copies of it and take it to the board meeting, circulate it to everybody, and then sit around and have a good chinwag about what it is and what should happen to the person, because that then snookers everybody on the board from hearing the disciplinary as it goes ahead, yeah? So what we want to do is, if we get that complaint come in, you as the secretary manager are likely to be the investigating officer, so you want to get appointed as the investigating officer. So we go to the board and all we say is, we've received a complaint, it's a potential disciplinary issue, please give me the green light to go ahead and investigate it. I'll come back to you if I need you in future. And then they should say, yep, no problem, rubber stamp you, away you go, and carry out the investigation. Then if you do need any of them in future to be on the panel for the disciplinary, you then go back and just pull 3 of them aside and get them to be the panel. Then nobody on the rest of the board is then compromised from hearing the appeal. Yeah? So we just try and section people off and make sure that they're not compromised from being able to hear things in future. So another important thing is the accused member's rights. So unless your constitution says something else, you don't have to give them advance notification of what the allegations are for an investigation meeting. Yeah, you could just collar them in the corridor one afternoon and say, "Are you in here now?" and ask them questions. And that's a very powerful way of gaining evidence, because that will get their knee-jerk reaction to what the allegations are. Whereas if you sent them an email and said, "Oh, can I meet you Thursday afternoon? It's about that scrap that was in the car park on Saturday afternoon," they're then going to go and talk to their mates, they're going to take legal advice maybe and try and concoct a story, whatever they're going to do. It's very powerful to get that initial reaction when you can get somebody on the hoof, because what might happen is that they might make up one story or have one excuse when you see them there, but then once they've gone away, had a think about it, spoken to mates, lawyers, they come to a disciplinary hearing and it's a completely different story. And then when you've got a disciplinary panel, I say, well, do we believe him or do we believe him? Well, this character here has changed his evidence from the original meeting as now, so I think we believe the other fella, quite honestly. So it can be very, very useful, but be advised that your disciplinary procedure or your constitution might give them a different right, and I've seen a few of them floating around where people are given the opportunity to get advance notification of that investigation meeting. So just make sure you don't trip yourselves up on that one. The next thing is in relation to data protection, our old friend GDPR. So when you're taking statements, you'll obviously meet with all of the relevant witnesses and take a statement from them. We've sometimes had people who say, yeah, there's my statement, off you go with it, and then complained a couple of weeks further down the line when that statement's then been disclosed to the other witnesses, or it's been disclosed to the panel, or importantly, it's been disclosed to the accused member. Yeah. So when we're taking the statement here, we obtain their consent, and I would suggest put a couple of lines on the end of the statement where they agree and consent to their statement being used going forward in the disciplinary process and disclosed to the accused, to the panel, to a potential appeal panel. Then you can't get criticised for that going forward. The situation, if somebody says, I refuse my consent, well, in those circumstances, you don't have a statement then, do you? Because you can't use the statement, so you lose a witness and they just go in the bin and you proceed with the other witnesses that you've got. Then that will impact upon what the panel ultimately has to decide upon by way of evidence as they get further down the line. Just a little point here on dealing with matters informally. Some disciplinary procedures will have the ability of normally the investigating officer to deal with it informally, for want of a better description, sweeping it under the carpet. So you may have taken statements from people and just be going, it's, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of another. These two characters are at it all the time. Gee, you can't be bothered with it. Sweep it under the carpet and pretend it never happened. That's just a recipe for disaster as far as I'm concerned, yeah, because I've seen it hundreds of times where it just boils under the surface and then it comes up again 6 months' time and it's all the same stuff. If you... another example of what's happened is that member A has complained about member B, take statements from them, and then people say, oh, it's how are we ever going to have a disciplinary hearing because it's his word against his word. They then say, right, we'll not proceed to disciplinary, we'll just tell them it's not happening, away you go. Well, member B has then said, and complained to the club and said, member A is telling lies about me, I want him taken to discipline because he's making up rubbish about me, yeah? So then you're back to exactly the same position. Whereas if you were to say, right, we've got a statement from member A, statement from member B, let's proceed to a disciplinary hearing, it goes in front of a panel, they can then make a decision based on the evidence, and then there's no ability for member B to complain about member A because you've then been through a process of making a decision on the balance of probabilities as to what the outcome is, what the evidence is, and then that's it put to bed. So you might, you know, find in favour of A, you might find in favour of B, but there shouldn't then be any complaint because you've tested the evidence under cross-examination and made a decent determination so that it can't proceed any further. So I would always say that even if we've got 50-50 of his word versus his word, proceed to a hearing. Remember that when we have hearings in the disciplinary arena for members, that we are not dealing with the criminal standard of proof, so that's beyond all reasonable doubt, yeah, which is a very, very high standard. We're in the civil arena for tribunals, for member discipline, for internal employment matters. We're dealing with the balance of probabilities, yeah? So it's, in numerical terms, 51%. Is it more likely than not that this happened, yeah? So even if we've got a statement from member A versus member B, we still go to a hearing, and it may be that the panel, when they get there, find that this character is, you know, we mentioned before about the value of that initial statement. He's then changed his story, and they say, well, he's quite clearly telling porcupines, so the balance tips in favour of the other person's evidence. We prefer that evidence. It may be that that person, you know, is, you know, looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling, they're stuttering over their answers, they can't answer straight, they then start changing their story when they're cross-examined. All those things might be sufficient to tip the balance in favour of the evidence going the other way. So I would say that, you know, it's very important that we proceed to deal with it, especially in a golf club where you've got a lot of different people, a lot of different factions, and it's going to boil up if we don't deal with it. So deal with things. You know, the law will tell you that you must, and this ties in with the delays point here, you must deal with disciplinary matters promptly and effectively. So we've got to do that. We don't want to be having delays when somebody's on holiday in Portugal. We want to be taking steps to get statements from people. If the problem is from our own side, so if it's because the investigating officer or because a person who's going to sit on the disciplinary panels is away on holiday or they're poorly or whatever, let's look for a substitute. Let's keep things moving. Let's use Zoom. Let's use phone calls, take telephone statements. Move on with it. Don't let these things drag on. You know, people will be ringing me sometimes saying, oh, well, this disciplinary thing, it started 6 months ago and we're taking 3/4 of the statements. We'll get there soon. And it's just, no, we need to deal with it a lot more promptly. Okay? So, next bit, you as the investigator will have done your bit, taken statements from everybody. And just one thing, sorry, before we get onto this one, that top point there, no recommendations. What you should be doing as the investigator is just gathering evidence, yeah? So you take statements, pull them together, you get any objective evidence, so it might be scorecards if it's to do with cheating, it might be other documentary evidence. We pull all that together, and then in the most basic sense, what your next job would be, dear disciplinary panel, herewith evidence, and that's it, yeah? Don't want to say anything else. The minute you start putting recommendations into some kind of fancy report, that's when you're starting to influence and bring about some degree of prejudgment for the panel that comes next. So we don't want to be doing that. We just want to be saying, there's the evidence, you get on with it, guys, okay? So, disciplinary procedure 2. So before the hearing, and this is where they do get the advance notification of what's coming for them. So this is where natural justice really starts to kick in. So this would be the letter that invites them to the disciplinary hearing. So date, time and place. We need to give them the detail of the allegations. So it doesn't want to be just a very bland statement. You were naughty last week. We want to be saying on whatever date and time it's alleged. We want to use the word alleged, or these are the allegations, or accusations, or whatever words, but we don't want to be using language by accident that indicates that there's an element of prejudgment. So we say these are the allegations. We want to break them down into separate allegations if there's a few things that have happened. So if there's been swearing, if there's been, you know, abuse, if there's been a fight, whatever, we break them down into separate things rather than bundling them all together in one allegation, because if they can disprove one, then that whole allegation may well fall away. So we want to break them down separately. So detail of the allegations, sufficient that they're able to defend themselves. You want to enclose the supporting evidence. So again, all our statements that we've gathered, any other objective evidence that goes in. I would say enclose your disciplinary procedure so that they know what they're doing, because they may well, you know, I've seen it, you know, when I was a solicitor, you know, going to employment tribunals, people would turn up at the hearing as a sort of sacked employee bringing an unfair dismissal claim. They'd say, I've never seen that in my life, when you're talking about a disciplinary procedure or an equal opportunities policy, and then you take them to the evidence and say, well, there's your signature having received it, so unlucky mate. So we want to make sure that we enclose all the evidence that we want to rely upon, the procedures, so that they have got that in advance before they get to the hearing and they know what they're talking about. A note on CCTV, so that if, you know, if there's been a fight in the car park, then we might have CCTV footage of that, yeah? So we've got to be very aware of GDPR. So what are the things we need to think about there? Well, we're the data controller, so we've got to act in accordance with all of our duties under GDPR. So we wouldn't send them a memory stick with all of the evidence on it, because we're then losing control of the data that we look after and that we're obligated to protect. What we do is we'd allow them to come in and view it within the office at certain dates and times. So we need to make sure that they have that opportunity. I wouldn't restrict them to just seeing it once, because they might say, oh, I didn't quite concentrate then, or I want to check something else. Give them a couple of opportunities if they want to, then it's, you know, it's as fair as it possibly can be. I wouldn't let them trawl through the whole week or 2 weeks worth of CCTV footage. We don't want that, because we've got to remember that there are going to be third parties on there. Will not just be, you know, John and Jeff having their fisticuffs. There will be other people in the background. There will be car number plates. There'll be other bits and bobs going on. So we restrict the timeline in, yeah. So we get it so that it's only, you know, maybe 3 or 4 minutes either side of what's happened, so that, you know, if he's saying, well, yeah, okay, I did hit him, but what you cut out of the footage was that as I was coming out of the clubhouse, he tripped me up and I fell over in the flower bed, so I then chased after him and then gave him a whack in the chops. So we want to make sure that the full story's there, the full picture's there. If we've got other people in the background, we can pixelate that, yeah? Because somebody might be having an affair and having a little smooch in the back corner of the car park, yeah? We want to make sure faces are pixelated out. So narrow the timeline, pixelate, keep it a reasonable timeline so that they can get the context, and then let's not release the data. Let's give them the opportunity to come and see it, okay? Other things, fairly standard stuff, warn them of the outcome, what the potential outcome is. Sorry, slip of the tongue there, warn them of the outcome. We don't prejudge it, we say the possible outcome, or this is what could happen if the allegations are proven. We've mentioned the right to be accompanied already. Should ask them in this letter who they want to come along as witnesses, so we know and we can make time for people coming along. When you do have witnesses, don't have them all sat at the back of the room, yeah, because then they'll hear what the other one said and then may change their story and know where the case is going. So you'd call witnesses in one at a time, but obviously the accused member, he's in there the whole time, or she, to be able to defend themselves. And we should advise them in this letter as well what the identity of the panel will be, so that they can potentially say, I'm not having that person because, you know, he's hated me all his life and I beat him in the match play last year, and, you know, he's going to have it in for me and never give me a fair decision. So again, it comes back to the impartiality point from natural justice, that we want to make sure they get an impartial panel that hears their case. Okay? Moving over to the next one. So some issues with the cross-examination there. We need a strong chair on the disciplinary panel, so we need to keep people on track and dealing with things that are relevant, yeah? So they might start talking about all kinds of rubbish that goes back 20 years or stuff from their private lives that's got nothing to do with any of this. We want to keep them on track, so we want to keep the evidence relevant. Hopefully you guys taking statements will keep them on that track and get relevant evidence. But very often things can go at a real massive tangent when it gets to a hearing. In the case again of that barrister that came in and ruined the club's disciplinary by picking on little procedural stuff, a strong chair in that case would have just cut him off and then concentrated on what we're trying to do. Okay. Next thing is, in terms of witnesses, we might have, let's say the complaint is something which has arisen as a result of a complaint from a member of staff because they've been bullied by a member, or sexual harassment from a member. Or we might find that member to member that there's a case of bullying or harassment or sex discrimination. Yeah. So if we've got vulnerable people who are on the other side of it, or employees, we never want to bring them into the disciplinary hearing, yeah, because it could end up exacerbating, you know, if they've been on the wrong end of a bullying claim, if they're then pulled into a disciplinary hearing with a big important panel of people in blue blazers and ties at the front, and you've got, you know, people sat around, you've got the accused member then starting to cross-examine them and point them in the face saying, you didn't see that, did you? Where were you? How many pints had you had? Were you wearing your glasses? And, you know, all this sort of stuff that people will ask quite aggressively in cross-examination. That's going to be a nightmare. You could end up with a constructive dismissal claim from an employee. You could end up with conditions being exacerbated for vulnerable people. It could be discrimination. It's just not something we want to do. So how do we deal with it? Well, rather than pull them into the hearing, what we'd look to do is to say to the person, the accused member, right, what questions do you want to ask that person? We'll write them all down, then we'll go away, take a supplementary statement from the person, get that written out, get it signed off, again with our lovely consent on the bottom, give it back to them, and then they've got the evidence that they were looking for, those further supplementary questions, and suffered minimal prejudice. Because remember, we're about balancing the fairness that that person's entitled to as the accused person to defend their case, their fair hearing, against obviously these issues that we've just spoken about for vulnerable people. So we're balancing it, giving the accused member as much as we possibly can in the circumstances without risking a claim for constructive dismissal or whatever. So yeah, we mentioned there already the panel avoid bias and prejudgment, so we don't want to have anybody going in there with a clear idea of what they're going to decide. Hopefully your panel members will be able to bring up any issues of potential conflict, so they'll know if they've had a golf trip to Portugal last year with one of the people who's within the disciplinary. They'll know if they're a witness, they'll know any other circumstances, they'll come forward and hopefully recuse themselves from taking part in the process if they're aware of that. But the whole idea of you giving the accused person knowledge of who the panel is in advance is that they can challenge that, because it's all very well for a panel member to say, oh, no, I won't. I'll give him an absolute fair hearing, even though I slept with his wife 10 years ago, yeah? He's not going to be able to do it. But it's very, very difficult for them to be able to disprove a negative and say, you know, I will give a fair hearing. So if there's any potential suggestion of bias, I would say just pull that person out and get somebody else in, yeah? And this is when we come to substitution and delegation. So ideally within your disciplinary procedure, you'll have it fairly widely drafted. An ideal one would just say the disciplinary panel can be drawn from any members of the club. Yeah, so we'll get a panel of 3 and it can be anybody. Yeah, and the same for the appeal. But sometimes the disciplinary procedure will be written in a way that it says that it can only be committee members, it can only be board members that can hear the disciplinary. That's very restrictive, so that if they're then biased, we're then snookered as far as being able to hold a disciplinary or an appeal hearing is concerned. So either have it widely drafted or have it in such a way that it says in the first place it'll be 3 members of committee or board, but then if there is some issue with them, or failing that, we would use wording like that, it can then be drawn from anybody in the membership, or it will be a panel of former captains or presidents or whatever we want to do. So we need that flexibility written in already. If we don't have that, then we can be in a quite a difficult situation, because we want to make sure that we're still able to do it within the Constitution. So ideally, if we don't have any of that, then we're stuck with a very strict process that says it can only be these people. We then look to the main articles or the main rules document, and that will hopefully have a power for the committee at any time to delegate their powers to other members. So that will then allow you to drop down and make a substitution within the whole thing.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Right.
Should we be thinking about gender balance on the panel?
Not really, no. You, just like with a board or a committee, you just make sure that you pick the best people for the job. Merit-based is what you want. Okay? So, recording the hearing. If we have somebody who wants to record it on a phone or dictaphone or whatever, again, GDPR comes in, so we'd need the consent of everybody if we're going to record that digitally. We'd need to make clear what the purpose of it is, whether we're going to keep it forever, which we're not. We would say we'll maybe keep it for another 2 weeks until we get the minutes written up carefully and then get those agreed by everybody. Once it's agreed, we'll then delete the recording, yeah? But you would need consent of everybody there. If you don't, then it's very important that you do keep notes. So you might want to bring somebody in from the office to take a note of what's been said within the hearing. That is something which, you know, once we've had the first disciplinary hearing, we then want to be able to disclose that to the accused person when we give them the written decision, so that they've got an idea of what they can put together as a case for an appeal going forwards if they want to do that. Last point there is the power of adjournment. It's just, again, it comes back to having a strong chair and being able to say, well, you know, he's just asked us a really difficult question, rather than make it up and say, yes, yes, it was that. We don't want to do that because it gets us in trouble. We just say, I'm not sure what the answer is, we'll adjourn, take legal advice, speak to somebody else in the club, whatever it is, and we'll come back to you in 20 minutes. Or it might be a big, big question where we have to adjourn and go back to him next week with a reconvened date for a hearing. But just don't get pushed into getting yourselves into trouble because you don't know an answer. Remember, it's the panel who are in charge of the disciplinary. They can adjourn if they're not sure about what an answer is or what they should be doing next. Disciplinary hearing itself, remember there are 2 parts to it. One is that are the allegations proven? Hang on, this has skipped ahead one. Are the allegations proven? So did the person do it or not? Once they've decided that, they then need to think about what the sanction will be. Yeah. So it's a 2-step process. You should hear evidence on both of them. So, you know, you would then, once you've decided that, yes, so-and-so's done it, we would then look to decide and hear evidence on what sanction we're going to give. So the accused may well put evidence forward and say, you know, I've been here 20 years, I've got a clean record, never done anything like this. Why on earth should you be kicking me out of the club for this? It's first offence, you know, those sorts of arguments that they might put forward. They might put forward arguments like, there was a case like this last year and Joe Bloggs only got a written warning, so a written warning is appropriate rather than expulsion for me. You've got to be even-handed in your treatment of the members, so that would be a reasonable argument to put forward. A reminder again of the standard of proof. We're on the balance of probabilities, 51%. We're not criminal standard. And we need to make sure within the hearing that the accused had an opportunity to put forward their defence. And that would come down again to the chair, just making sure before the thing's closed, before the panel goes away to make their decision, you just ask them, is there anything more that you want to add? Is there anything more? Then that's in the minutes, and then they can't ever come back at a later date and say, oh, I didn't get a fair hearing, you didn't give me a chance to say this or do that. Just make sure we've got all of that recorded. Okay? So when we come to make the decision, we can potentially announce it on the day. So we might have sufficient evidence that it might be a relatively uncomplicated case so that we can make that decision there and then. But whatever you do, I would suggest that you have, let's say, a 20-minute adjournment. Go in the back room, have a cup of coffee, at least make it be seen that you're considering what the evidence is and what you're going to do. Even though in reality probably everybody's got a great idea what they're going to decide before they even walk in the door. But we need to be seen to be going through the process, yeah? It may genuinely be a bit of a head scratcher, so adjourn it and say we'll give you a written decision within 7 days. Everyone goes away, you can take legal advice, get together and have a chat about it, and you can give a nice balanced decision. Some disciplinary procedures will provide for the panel to do the hearing, but then if they want to expel somebody, they've then got to go back to the committee to get approval, or for the committee sometimes to make the decision on the overall sanction. We don't want that. Get rid of that from your disciplinary procedure. We want full powers delegated to the disciplinary panel. It's going to interfere with natural justice if you have another body come in and make a decision on something where they've heard none of the evidence, where they've heard none of the mitigation issues. It's just totally wrong. So make sure that we do get that full power delegated across to the panel who are making that decision. Think about as well GDPR in the case of a complaint that comes from an employee. So the case, let's say, of a member who sexually harasses a member of the bar staff, yeah? That person brings a grievance. So as a manager, you're going to be dealing with two processes at once, yeah? You're going to be dealing with the employment grievance on the one hand, you're going to be dealing with member discipline on the other. So we start the employee grievance side of things. So we say, you know, treating it as a grievance, we will now investigate, hold your horses, and then adjourn that process. Then we go to our member discipline, deal with it all, investigate disciplinary hearing. If it's been really bad, kick them out. Then we need to give a resolution to the employment grievance. So we need to go back to them. And they, as an individual, may be stewing on a potential complaint of sexual harassment, maybe stewing on a complaint of constructive dismissal. They might be wanting to walk out the door, but you're trying to save the situation and make it so that they want to stay and they feel they can continue to work in a place that's free from discrimination. So if you just went back and said it's been dealt with, yes, thanks very much, that's not going to be enough for them. They want to know that they can continue. So under GDPR, you would normally need the consent of the other person to disclose details across to somebody else. But there are exceptions and exemptions under GDPR, under the data protection legislation, where if you've got legitimate reason, you've got legitimate interest to disclose that, then we can quite easily do that under the grievance process. So I would say there you would have legitimate interest to disclose the detail across to the employee and say, Joe Bloggs has now been expelled, so you can come back to work knowing that this should not happen again because that character has long gone out of the club. And then that'll hopefully save the situation as far as the grievance is concerned. Yeah. So once we make our decision, we confirm that by letter to the accused. We want to give them a right of appeal within that letter. Very important. That's the last strand of our process for natural justice. We're basically under an appeal. We're going to mirror the process that we had for disciplinary, so we want to make sure that we don't have a biased panel. We want to go through everything of allowing hearing, make sure that we think about whether or not we need a full rehearing of the original. We might not. They might only appeal against the harshness of the sanction. So that doesn't mean that you need to then trot out all of the witnesses again to determine whether or not they did punch somebody in the face or whether they did do whatever they're accused of doing. We then just need to deal with the issue of sanctions, so we don't have to create this full rigmarole of a full hearing. We then come to a final decision through the appeal. Within the disciplinary process, internally, that should be the end of it. There are some rare circumstances where people can appeal if it's a decision relating to the rules of golf to the National Union. So it is possible if there's been a cheating case that they might go another level out there. But otherwise, once it's decided internally, their only other route is to go to court. Yeah, bring a claim for breach of contract because you've messed up your procedure. But if you stick to procedure, there shouldn't be much for them to go at there. A few sort of common issues, problems that we see with these things. It's the concept of the complainant, so the person that brings the original complaint, they're not the driving force behind the disciplinary process. The club is the guardian, if you like, the one that regulates and disciplines its members, yeah? So once that complaint comes in, that person that says, I saw John kicking his ball out the rough on the 18th, he's been cheating, they're nothing more than a witness, yeah? They don't decide whether it goes forward. They're not entitled to know what the outcome of the disciplinary hearing is later on. They're not allowed to complain about it or appeal against it. They're just another witness in the whole thing. It's then the club that drives forward the disciplinary process. Another thing to think about is just how and again, it's just a case of you guys checking your disciplinary procedures, how the disciplinary complaint comes in, because some of them are drafted in a way it just says it's only member-to-member complaints that are dealt with under the disciplinary procedure. And we don't want that because we might have an employment complaint come in about a member being naughty. We might have a visitor or a guest complain about a member doing something naughty. We might have a neighbour complain about somebody doing something naughty. There could be many different avenues. It may be something that you as the secretary manager discovers because you're doing the score cards at the weekend, you see somebody's cheating. So we need to make sure it's not member to member, yeah? We want to make sure that it's worded in such a way that the disciplinary procedure can start from any source. We've mentioned the grievances and the grievance issues and witnesses and victims and what have you. A point on anonymous witnesses. Very often we'll have people come along and say, you know what, he's been cheating, but I'll give you a statement, but don't mention my name. Yeah, that happens very, very often. And people generally are not entitled to anonymity during the course of the process here. They would only be entitled to anonymity in circumstances where there was a genuine fear for reprisals. So if they thought they were going to get the tyres slashed, if they thought the house was going to be burnt down, or if they thought they'd be beaten up, in the case of somebody in an employment situation, if they were going to be denied promotion opportunities or bullied further or sacked or whatever, these are the sort of things. So when you're taking statements and somebody's asking for anonymity, we push them, ask them questions about whether or not there is this genuine fear for reprisals. If there's not, then no anonymity. You say, right, you either put your name on it or no statement from you. It's the same as the point that we said on consent earlier on. So just push them on that. We mentioned before about making sure we've got other avenues. If we've got a committee who should be hearing the case being compromised from hearing it, those are just a list of things where they may be compromised. So if they've already been involved in the investigation, if they are witnesses in the case, so they saw the incident happen on the 18th, they're not going to then be able to make a judgment on it. If we've talked about it in a board meeting, they may be the subject of the complaint. We need to make sure we can substitute. One particular nightmare that I've seen as a problem area for some clubs is, rather than have this lovely disciplinary procedure that I've talked about here, where the appeals all dealt with nicely internally from a panel that you select, is that a constitution will be written in a way that if the person wants to appeal against the outcome of a disciplinary, they can call the full EGM of the club and have a members meeting, and you get everyone in and whoa, nightmare. We don't want to do that, yeah? Imagine trying to deal with that as far as GDPR is concerned. It would just be an absolute car crash these days. It may have worked in sort of 1920s when golf clubs were first set up, but in today's world, nightmare. We've had one where, you know, again, it was there was a member accused of sexually harassing a female member of the bar staff. No, it wasn't. What had he done? Oh, he'd exposed himself to a cleaning lady in the toilets. Nice lad. So he'd been disciplined, kicked out, and then all his mates started writing to the club saying, oh, you know what, he'd had a few drinks that day, he's really a good lad, he's been here 20 years, he's an ex-captain, just let him off. And the club were like, don't think so. And then they started saying, right, well, if you don't, we're going to call an EGM, and we'll bus in all of the lads. So they've got like a group of 50 established old boys who are going to come in and say, we'll vote for him to be reinstated. Imagine not being able to put that vote down. That person gets reinstated, at which point the female member of staff then has to face this guy next time she comes to work, at which point you've got a discrimination claim, constructive dismissal. It'll hit the press, be an absolute nightmare. So we just need to make sure the Constitution doesn't have any of that in it, because it would just be an absolute disaster. Again, we mentioned before, sometimes people will say, oh, everyone at the club knows what's been happening with this disciplinary. They're all talking about it. So if it's all right with you, we'll just send an email out to everybody and tell them that Jeff's been kicked out of the club. It's like, no, we don't. We don't disclose the detail of what's happened at the disciplinary. Similarly, where that original complainant has put in the original grumble about Joe Bloggs, we don't give them the outcome. Yeah, we don't tell them this is what happened to him, because he'll then be writing you saying, well, you've only given him a written warning, he should have been kicked out, and we don't want any of that either. It's all confidential as far as we're concerned. If he wants to go and complain about it to his mates, off he goes, but as far as the club's concerned, we don't want to do that. Got one slide to do, I've got about 30 seconds. So remember as well, if we've got a number of people accused of misconduct, give them all an individual hearing. Don't have them all on block come in. It can interfere with natural justice. You can sometimes find that people, when they're on their own, will break under pressure of cross-examination, and they'll say, it was all him, it wasn't me. And you can get a decent outcome from it, yeah? So we make sure, and it's important for them as well to be on their own and have their own individual hearing. So make sure we do that. One thing that I would want you to do coming out of the back of today is just go and check your own procedures. Make sure that none of these quirks in there of nightmarish, old-fashioned EGMs for appeals, or any advanced disclosure obligations before an investigation, or any other bits and bobs. Make sure we can substitute and delegate people for the panels. And remember, we've got to overlay these principles of natural justice into it all. Final thing is, remember, in member disciplinaries, you're judging them against the Constitution. So are they bringing the club into disrepute, acting contrary to the best interests of the club? You are not, if it's a fight, trying to work out whether or not it's common assault, it's ABH, it's GBH. Again, if it's in the criminal world, yeah, we don't pause our disciplinary procedure for a criminal case to take its course through the Crown Court, because you'd be there for about a year waiting for it to happen, first of all. But the CPS and the judges and what have you in the criminal arena, they're judging it against, first of all, a different standard of proof, so they're beyond all reasonable doubt. You're just, was Joe Bloggs rolling around on the floor fighting with so-and-so? Does that bring the club into disrepute? Yes, no, 51%, yes it does. Off we go. They've got a much more complicated job in the court. So we just need to judge them against that process that we've got internally, which is much more straightforward and has a much lower standard of proof to get us over. So hopefully a lot to think about there. I'm around for most of the rest of the day. You can ask me questions. I know we're on tight timescale, but if there's any quick questions now, I can take them. Otherwise, I'll hand over to the next person.
Hopefully, a quick question. When you said dealing with it informally about people in the office and plan work, would you suggest having someone there to witness what they're saying? Because they might say something to you, you record it, and then they deny saying.
Yeah, it could be sensible. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that would be if you're taking the statement from them, yeah, rather than dealing with it informally.
You said going back through the slides, you might just want to appoint them in the office, not to give them the opportunity to think about what it is?
Yeah, so that's the investigation stage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, when you're taking a statement, I mean, ultimately, when you're taking that statement from them, you would write the statement down, get it paragraph by paragraph, and then put the consent on and give it to them to sign off. So if there's any dispute about the content of it, they would refuse to sign. So you're going to be getting into difficulty over the detail of the evidence there. So ultimately, you'd only ever want them to sign off on what that document is. So they might change the tune from when they're actually sat there with you, but you can hopefully get that narrowed down quite quickly within the hearing if you're taking a written statement from them and then put a dotted line at the end and get them to sign it. Yeah. Right.
Another quick question, hopefully. If as GMs we're the investigating officer, should we then be and don't take it in the discipline, or should we not be involved?
I would say no, don't be, because although your role is there just as a note taker, you could have accusations from the accused person to say, oh, well, he did the full investigation, he's obviously made his mind up, and then he went in there, he was only there allegedly to take notes, but the minute I went out the room, he stayed in there with the panel and then started whispering in their ear. Again, it's what I mentioned before, it's difficult to disprove the negative, so if you stay as clean as you can, just with the investigating officer then disappear from the process, have somebody else to take the notes, that allegation won't arise. Yeah.
Very quick question, sorry.
Follows on from that. I've always taken the position, I'm a GM as well, I've always taken the position to not get involved in it at all, only from the standpoint that I can do pretty much what you've just done, is advise the different parties. So if, for example, the investigating officer wanted to ask a couple of procedural questions, I can answer it, and then if the disciplinary panel wanted to ask the same purely procedural, nothing to do with the actual case, I can answer that as well. Whereas if I, from what Martin said, if I was the investigating officer, I could then not be involved in any part going forward from the point of view of the disciplinary panel or the appeals panel, whereas I think if I take a step back and let different people do the different aspects, I can be that overall umbrella.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean,
and the letters go out often with our names on the bottom. So I think
yeah, I mean, it's a case of, I know a lot of managers in reality will end up writing that letter to invite them to the disciplinary hearing after having been the investigator, but you would normally put that just in the name of the club rather than your name, so it's not immediately apparent. I think in reality, if you wanted to adopt what you're talking about there of that overall sort of advisor to the club for the investigator, the disciplinary and the appeal, that's fine, no problem at all. What I often do though, again, it's the club that's the member of the NGCAA, so that if you were involved in the investigation, you can ring me or email me at any time. If it then moves on to the disciplinary panel, just let them ring me and they can get advice direct on that if they want to, similarly for an appeal. So it doesn't have to be that you're snookered by being the overall advisor for it. You could get involved with the investigation if you wanted to. Yeah. Yeah.
Is there an ideal time frame for anything, or is it purely, say, within 12 months you want to bring that back into conversation again, or does it get dismissed after 8-9 months? Any sort of situation where, like you said, a member of staff was, well, there was a situation with us, there was a member of staff behind the bar, and then very similarly to what you said, the member was gross misconduct towards them. If I could bring it up in 6 months' time, would that ever...
You should deal with it promptly and effectively at the time.
Is there a time frame where the member can say, no, that's not a conversation anymore, or can you bring it up whenever?
Well, as soon as it's reported to you, you should deal with it promptly and effectively. So I would say if it's something like that, you should have it done and dusted within a couple of weeks. Okay. But if somebody's done something wrong, and then you give them, say, a warning, and then they then re-offend in 6 months' time, if the terms of that warning are such that if you do it again, then you'll be out, then you can bring that up again, if that's what you're meaning, yeah?
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop there, sorry, Alistair.
Right, okay.
Just for time, but Alistair's here over lunch, so if you want to call him then. But thank you so
All
much,
right.
round of applause.
Okay.